Hi everyone and welcome. Joining us from New York today is Aaron Maté, a journalist and a host of the online show on the Gray Zone, Pushback with Aaron Maté. So thank you for coming back on the program.
Great to see you, Glenn.
Um, the topic I really want to discuss with you today is that of Russiagate. Again, this is I guess from 2016 already, this conspiracy theory that Trump was in the pocket of the Kremlin. It again took the headlines of the media. It was referred to as another 9/11, another Pearl Harbor. Again, it helped to fuel a very militant mood, reduce the willingness for diplomacy, and I guess set up a path towards war. But it also shaped the very aggressive posture of the United States in Ukraine. For example, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, he argued in 2020 that the US aids Ukraine so we can fight Russia over there, so we don't have to fight Russia here. This is essentially a slogan from the war on terror. Um, so yeah, so I want to discuss with you a bit of what we now know about the Russiagate stories, but also some of the consequences. Again, it's almost a decade now, but what is it that we actually know about Russiagate? Because there hasn't been that many corrections in the media.
Well, stay tuned for my forthcoming book, which comes out later this year on that, because I delve into a lot of what you just discussed, how Russiagate fueled not only a moronic conspiracy theory that Trump was secretly conspiring and being blackmailed by Russia, but also fueled a major escalation of U.S.-Russia tensions, which helped gave us this current phase of the war in Ukraine. It originates with the Clinton campaign in the spring of 2016. They hired a firm called Fusion GPS, which in turn hired Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence agent, to write a fake dossier alleging a sprawling conspiracy between Trump and the Kremlin, in which Trump was, on the one hand, conspiring with Russia while also being blackmailed by it with a sex tape filmed in a Russian hotel room. It was moronic, but yet the entire establishment media in the US and across the NATO world, including in the UK especially, took it seriously. And it fueled this storm of innuendo and just conspiracy theorizing that surrounded Trump in his first years in office and made it very difficult for an improvement in US-Russia relations, which Trump had campaigned on. He had talked about getting along with Russia, but the fact that he was accused of being a Russian agent made it impossible for him to basically do diplomacy, and incentivized him to go along with the agenda of his neoconservative aides, people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who wanted to advance the longtime U.S. policy of trying to contain and undermine Russia. So it incentivized him to pursue hawkish policies, and we can talk about all the things he did, which helped contribute to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It also helped incentivize Democrats to look away and not take seriously all the dangers they were fueling by accusing him of being a Russian agent, and along with the corporate media as well. And it was just the perfect storm of privileged interests benefiting from this scam. For the Clinton campaign, especially after they lost, they could blame Russia rather than themselves for giving rise to a former reality TV show host and letting him take the presidency. For the media, which had cheered on Trump's candidacy, profited off of it, and also serves the very same elites who run society. And Trump is someone who took advantage of uniquely American dysfunctions to win the presidency. This was a good way for them to avoid self-reflection as well and responsibility by blaming, this sprawling Russian conspiracy to install Trump. It also advanced this elitist view of American people as being malleable and able to be brainwashed by foreign adversaries, by Russian social media posts and stolen emails. For the national security state, they didn't like the fact that Trump was they didn't like that Trump was an unsuitable steward of the global U.S. empire. He said the wrong things. He says things like, we're in Syria to take the oil, not we're in Syria to spread democracy and freedom and fight terrorism. And also they didn't like the fact that he was talking about getting along with Russia. So accusing him of being a Russian agent helped not only undermine his stated calls for better relations with Russia, but also stigmatize the approach he was publicly advocating, which was diplomacy, and also criticizing military intervention. So rather than criticizing military interventions being a reflection of the spirit of the country where many people are at, this somehow also is spreading Russian propaganda. So it was just the perfect convergence of powerful interests behind this scam, and it fueled this ridiculous scandal, not only about collusion, which everyone now knows is a complete scam, even though everyone believed in it and across the spectrum. I'm on the political left, and those of us on the political left in the US who were against this or critical of it, you can count us on like a few hands. Everybody went into it because also one of the beauties of Russiagate was it took advantage of people's genuine fears of Trump, like people who were scared about his demonization of undocumented immigrants, and all the legitimate grievances that people had against Trump were channeled into this moronic conspiracy theory. So it was very difficult to speak out against it. But but at least the collusion aspect now, no one tries to defend that anymore. People still though believe that the other aspect of Russiagate, which is just as much of a scam, which is of Russian interference, this massive Russian interference campaign that brainwashed Americans into not voting for Hillary, that is still standing. And that serves the agenda of still demonizing Russia and making diplomacy very difficult with it. Because how can we talk to a country that's trying to destroy our democracy through social media posts and sowing discord? And that was just as ridiculous as collusion, but that one is still that one is still standing because it still serves a political usage, which is demonizing relations with Russia and having a foreign boogeyman that we can always blame for our problems to justify waging, for example, proxy war against it.
Yeah, this is fascinating that even after the allegations were proven to be false, the narrative still survived. We still talk about the need to defend our democracy from this Russian interference. What is also troubling, though, I guess, is this whole the concept of propaganda was more or less hijacked because on one side, whatever the anti-Russian arguments were, they go unopposed. The Guardian argued that Trump had been an agent of the Russians for over 40 years, and they had the people. Business Insider, CNN reporting that Putin bathes in the reindeer blood because of superstitions, and like the point is that you can say any crazy things you want these days because no one wants to be caught seemingly coming to the defense of Russia or Putin. So if you can say, yeah, eats children for breakfast, who would oppose it? This no one wants to. So our side don't have propaganda apparently, but it seemed the opposing side, yeah, everything they say now is propaganda, and they, I guess, they fed this whole idea that democracy is not some principles we live by. Instead, it's the need by the government to not just protect us from Russian interference, but also enemies within, those who secretly sympathize with Russia. But we also had the sequel of Russiagate, because in the following election in 2020, it was this, the Biden laptop scandal. But how was it possible that there was no repercussions? Because this was also disproven. But has there been any consequences for this, or?
None. And, there's a huge tie-in here with the Ukraine war because some of the key figures behind Russiagate and then behind Ukraine Gate, which is a sequel to Russiagate, which was when Trump was impeached for freezing weapons to Ukraine while putting pressure on Zelensky. And then the Biden laptop scam was all the same people who were involved in the Ukraine proxy war. The first person to deploy the FBI to go pick up the Steele dossier and meet with Christopher Steele, you know who that was? It was Victoria Nuland, the key State Department official involved in the Maidan coup and an architect of the U.S. strategy in Ukraine over the last decade plus, which is to use Ukraine for a proxy war against Russia. So Victoria Nuland in July 2016, she's the one who authorized an FBI agent to go to Rome to go meet with Christopher Steele. And the FBI now claims that that meeting had nothing to do with its decision to open up the Trump-Russia investigation. They said that their predicate for that investigation was a totally different tip, which is just such a funny story. You really want us to believe that that FBI agents meeting with Christopher Steele, pursuing an investigation that exactly mirrored his fake dossier in terms of who they went after, what leads they pursued, that had nothing to do with the Trump-Russia investigation. And the official predicate they have some comment from George Papadopoulos, who's a low-level Trump campaign volunteer. It's just such a complete scam. And look, what was Victoria Nuland concerned about at that time? On the campaign trail, Donald Trump was talking about cooperating with Russia. He also was saying things like, we don't want to have World War III over Ukraine. So neocons like Victoria Nuland and others in Washington saw this as a major threat to their project. And that's why I think they got behind this Russiagate scam so quickly. And they were joined by Trump's allies, people like Lindsey Graham at the time. In late 2016, early 2017, if you remember, there's that infamous visit of Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Senator Amy Klobuchar to the front lines, where the U.S.-backed coup government in Kyiv is waging, a war against Russian-backed rebels in eastern Ukraine. And that's when John McCain and Lindsey Graham are saying, this 2017 will be the year of offense. Your fight is our fight. Russia will pay a heavy price, as if they're somehow as if these two senators from the U.S. are, for some reason, Ukrainian battlefield commanders. Like, what are they doing, egging on Ukrainian soldiers and telling them what's going to happen? That speaks to the huge investment that the U.S. had in this proxy war already back then.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
And one of the things they said at the time, both Lindsey Graham and John McCain, is this Russian hacking operation in our elections was an attack on our sovereignty, and we're going to push back. So they recognized early on that these Russian hacking allegations, Russian interference allegations, could be used to advance their proxy war in Ukraine. And what happened when Trump took office? He was immediately faced with huge bipartisan pressure to send weapons to Ukraine that Obama, his predecessor, had refused to send, because Obama didn't want to further inflame the proxy war that he started out of fears of escalation, and also out of fears that Obama had that sending U.S. weapons would end up in the hands of neo-Nazis like the Azov Battalion. Now, Trump, though, coming into office, he's motivated to sort of prove he's tougher than Obama, because Trump had a personal dislike of Obama. Plus, everyone's calling him a Russian agent. So, his fragile ego is now motivated to show that he's not a Russian agent. So he's going to show them by sending weapons to Ukraine, which he reluctantly approved. And then he fast forward to the failure of Russiagate. Robert Mueller in July 2019 gives that congressional testimony. It's the final nail in the coffin of Russiagate, after not a single charge or shred of evidence for collusion, and a lot of deception deployed to accuse Russia of interference, which, as I've written about extensively, none of the evidence backs it up. And we can go into it now, but the point is there's nothing there. So Robert Mueller gives this disastrous testimony. And a day or two later, that's when Trump has his phone call with Zelensky, where Trump says to Zelensky, I'd like your help looking into not only the Biden's corruption, which he brought up, he also brought up that there was a Ukrainian tie to the origins of Russiagate. And he wanted Zelensky's help looking into that too. That's the part that always gets ignored from that narrative. But what Trump was talking about was Ukrainian officials seeking to impress their Obama administration handlers, people like Victoria Nuland and John Brennan, who were deeply involved in the Maidan coup. Ukrainian officials were involved in Russiagate. They pushed disinformation about Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager. And we only recently learned, very, very recently, from the New York Times, that on the core allegation of Russian hacking, John Brennan, the director of the CIA, used Ukrainian intelligence to help advance that allegation as well. So Ukraine was implicated from the start in Russiagate. And that's what Trump was actually trying to pressure Zelensky to help him look into. Because at the time, Trump wanted revenge and he wanted accountability for this scam that had engulfed his presidency. So the long way of saying Ukraine was heavily tied to Russiagate. Russiagate encouraged an escalation of tensions in Ukraine and encouraged conflict in Ukraine. And that's when we get to Trump's first impeachment. And you mentioned Adam Schiff saying the United States aids Ukrainian people so that we can fight Russia over there. We don't have to fight Russia here. That was the message from that impeachment, that Trump had undermined national security by somehow pausing weapons to Ukraine. And the overwhelming message from Republicans and Democrats in that impeachment was that, yes, it's good to use Ukraine to fight Russia over there. There was no debate about that whatsoever. Again, a few of us at the time in the US, myself, Michael Tracy, Max Blumenthal, we were calling this out. It's like, why are we using Ukraine to fight Russia over there? Why is that a good thing? My mentor, the late Stephen F. Cohen, at the time, he was saying, this is a disaster for Zelensky that Democrats are doing this, because he's now facing threats from far-right death squads if he pursues the Minsk process. We should be having his back, not impeaching Trump for freezing weapons that fuel that fight. We should be trying to end that fight. but nobody cared. Nobody wanted to listen. And, even though Trump wasn't impeached, the message was reinforced that it's a good thing to use Ukraine for a proxy war against Russia. And that followed into the next election. These same intelligence officials who had no repercussions whatsoever for the Russiagate scam, they turn around and try to undermine Trump once again. They blame Russia for Hunter Biden's laptop. And that also helped Trump lose, because that reporting was censored on those fake grounds that the laptop was a Russian operation. And so when Biden takes office, he's now won on the strength of more Russia baiting, more Russia fear mongering. And that helps incentivize him, not that he probably needed it, to ignore diplomacy with Russia and encourage a proxy war that descended into a full-blown Russian invasion in February 2022.
Yeah, this linking Trump on and the resistance to Trump to fighting Russia. This is really, I think, at the core of how it has contributed to where we are now. But I also thought you mentioned how they responded to the laptop scandal, because this people forget that was very much election interference and also full censorship. That was the 51 former intelligence agents went out and said that this was Russian disinformation. You had Twitter, Facebook, effectively blocking any links to the story, I think they took down the New York Post as well. So this is, I guess, somewhat unprecedented in American election history. But it does beg the question of this relationship between the intelligence agencies and the media, because this is something also we hadn't seen before, but which has to some extent been normalized now. That is, at least in the past, it was a scandal if the intelligence agencies would infiltrate the media. But these days, you had in 2017, you had the CNN hiring, former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. They hired NSA director Michael Hayden as a security analyst. Same as MSNBC, they hired CIA director John Brennan as an analyst. In the past, this had to be hidden and it was exposed and it was a scandal. But now it's really hiding in plain sight, and it becomes this strange cycle where the intelligence community feeds false information to the media reports it, and then the intelligence agents refer to the media reports which they contributed to. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Do you see this having some lasting consequence on how the media and intelligence agencies work?
It's one of many reasons why I was so vocally critical of Russiagate, is because I thought it was taking us backwards as a democracy. First of all, there's so much projection involved when it comes to Russiagate. This hysteria about election interference. Well, the actual election interference was, as you pointed out, unelected national security state officials in the State Department and the intelligence agencies interfering in an election by framing an elected president as a Russian agent. It's blatant election interference. Also, by concocting these allegations that Russia launched a sweeping interference operation. That's why Trump was elected, not because of the will of enough voters. So that was brazen election interference, and that continues because they received no consequences in 2020 with another act of election interference by claiming Hunter Biden's laptop as a Russian disinformation operation. And yes, leading to, as you said, the censorship of that story on those fake grounds, which is a form of authoritarianism, another thing that they were constantly warning about under Trump. So everything that they claimed to oppose, they were actually pursuing themselves. And one of the consequences of that was cementing the influence of unelected national security state officials who gave themselves the right to interfere in multiple elections, and not only in American democracy, but in Ukrainian democracy as well, after overthrowing the elected government there in 2014. And then in part waging this Russiagate scam to help defend that project that they began, that anti-democratic project that they were waging in Ukraine. So, and because they exploit, and what happened was, and I saw this with so many of my friends and colleagues on the progressive left and media, people were so understandably afraid of Trump, and I don't diminish the harm that he poses and why there are reasons to fear him, but they exploited that and they channeled people's legitimate grievances into ultimately a campaign that strengthened the power of unelected officials that worsened tensions with Russia drastically, that incentivized people to like embrace cold warriors and neocons as the saviors of democracy, and only increased polarization because there was also so much contempt as a result of Trump voters, rather than any attempt to understand where they were coming from, whether they might have had legitimate grievances with the system that failed them. Everyone on their side was accused of being a Russian dupe, and you're all brainwashed by Russia. So it also really increased polarization. It showed on the part of coastal liberal elites a lot of smug contempt for average people and a willingness to embrace really one of the dumbest conspiracy theories of all time, which is that Trump was being blackmailed by Russia, which again, those of us challenging that, you can count on a very small number of fingers.
It seemed as if, well, again, unleashed another wave of neo-McCarthyism. That is, any political opposition was presented as un-American activities, effectively.
Yes.
And well, it was strange how many people were accused of this. Jill Stein, of course, but Tulsi Gabbard, even Mitch McConnell was referred as Moscow Mitch because he didn't toe the line. I mean, it's really anyone who opposed, the political will could end up with this label. If you're not serving our cause, then you're serving the cause of the Russians. And this is also, I guess, a key theme of the original McCarthyist. That is the McCarthy. That is the ability to create this culture of fear and monopolize on what's patriotism, because this is also something you see, I guess, in the United States. Well, for example, this idea that support the troops. If you care about the troops, then you will not question their deployment and keep them there. Other people would say that supporting the troop means you only put them in harm's way and then when necessary, but you monopolize on what it entails to support troops. But anyways, if you would look at some of the legacy though of Russiagate, where we are today, because we've taken things which would have been unthinkable in the past, we see now happening. For example, this very recent attack by the Ukrainian proxy on Russia's nuclear deterrent, that is attacking its nuclear bombers. Before Russiagate, one would have thought that some would have, come with some warnings going, wait, this is insane. But all restraints appear to disappear during the Russiagate year. I don't know if how you read this situation with the attacks on the nuclear bombers, and why there's a complete absence, it seems, of any critical voices.
Well, just a quick comment on the propaganda aspect of this. It's one of the most successful, if not the most successful, intelligence deception in recent memory, far more even successful than the Iraq War. During the Iraq War, you at least had some media outlets vocally pushing back on this. Like McClatchy, Knight Ridder was pushing back on it. Democracy Now!, where I used to work, vocally pushing back. The Nation magazine. But Russiagate, you look at all these same outlets who were adversarial during the Iraq War and stood apart for being adversarial. The Intercept also, for example, with only a few exceptions, everybody fell in line. And this narrative was just impossible to challenge, and those of us doing it were just a tiny amount. And that speaks to just how successful this Russiagate scam was in enlisting people into thinking that they were challenging Trump by buying into a moronic conspiracy theory and by buying into Cold War dogma, which is what ultimately this encouraged. And yes, one of the results is when you make Trump, who's hated by many liberals, synonymous with Putin, and then you impeach him because he froze some weapons to Ukraine, and you say what a horrible thing that is because we have to fight Russia over there, and nobody challenges that. What you do is you reinforce the imperatives of the neocons who think it's great that we have a proxy war going in Ukraine against Russia, and that it's bad to have diplomacy with Russia. And so therefore, when Trump, for example, pulled out of the INF treaty during his first term at the behest of John Bolton, who has been dreaming about killing arms control for his entire career, that's why he wakes up in the morning, one of the reasons, so he can kill arms control. Everybody yawned. No one cared. It just didn't matter because people were more still concerned about this fake Russian collusion interference scandal surrounding Trump than they were about Trump actually killing arms control and increasing tensions with Russia. So that encouraged a McCarthyite hawkish climate, and It made diplomacy with Russia impossible. Um, and it helped give us the climate we're in now, where people do not feel comfortable challenging the prevailing proxy war orthodoxy because they don't want to be accused of being pro-Trump or being pro-Russian. And that's why no one can think clearly through the consequences of what we've been supporting Ukraine, which now has led to this audacious Ukrainian operation where they're targeting Russian strategic aircraft. Let me ask you about that. I'm curious your thoughts. This is clearly a huge military intelligence coup for Ukraine. It was a very bold operation. Like as an intelligence operation, it's pretty impressive. But how will destroying Russian strategic aircraft, however many were actually destroyed by Ukraine, how will that help Ukraine in the war against Russia, a war that's largely being fought on the ground, where Russia still holds the advantage? And we've seen that advantage because they've taken 20% of Ukrainian territory and are still advancing. And Ukraine's having a hard time replenishing its ranks because they just lack the population, especially compared to Russia.
Well, I don't think it helps that much on the front lines, if anything at all. I think it's more about the PR because, uh, what a key concern here from the Trump administration is, we don't want to follow this into a nuclear war with the Russians, and also the Russians are too strong. They're winning this, but from Zelensky's point of view, I guess the main thing he wants to communicate is that the Russians are weaker than they seem, and also there's no reason to be afraid of Russia's nuclear forces. There's something here from the Baltic states, by the way. This is outdated to be worried about nuclear war. No one's going to use it. Yes, striking these forces is supposed to, yeah, convince, will open the door for Western countries to, suddenly the Germans sending Taurus missiles, for example, it's not that big of a deal anymore because, we can attack their nuclear forces and they won't do anything. Now, this is why it's such an absurd gamble as well, because this is exactly, crossing this huge red line is something which is intended to set a precedent. So now we can do this. Now, why can't Western countries send missiles which we can attack their nuclear forces? So this puts a lot of pressure, of course, on the Russians because now uh, Russia's deterrent is very harmed. They need to, restore this. What if you can attack Russia's nuclear forces and there's no reaction? I mean, this would be a crisis in Russian security. So again, this is very recent now, but I can't imagine them not retaliating in a very powerful way. And yeah, but also it's quite concerning if you think about what the Western involvement would be, because according to the Ukrainians, the planning has gone on for more than a year. Uh, and are we really supposed to believe that this anti-Russian forces, be it in Berlin, Paris, London, or Washington, foaming at the mouth at their hatred of Russia, that none of them had anything,
Yeah.
no involvement at all, no knowledge, and if this fairy tale isn't true, that they did know and even might have supported this, well, I'm going with the assumption that they did support this. Now we have NATO engaged in attacks on Russia's nuclear forces. And if you're sitting at high command in Russia, you have to ask yourself why the NATO countries are interested in destroying your nuclear forces. There's rational reasons why Zelensky would want it, but why NATO?
Yeah.
You know, this is a very tense situation, and they are, especially now ahead of Germany trying to start these direct attacks on Russia with the Taurus missiles. They're under immense pressure to make a point here now. So again, I don't have a glass ball. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but if Oreshnik missiles begin to rain down upon Ukraine, it wouldn't surprise me either. This is seen as something that would trigger a nuclear retaliation. Imagine something had gone wrong in those attacks and there would have been some nuclear incident. I mean, this is beyond insane. And this is why it's so surprising, because look across the Western politicians, the Western media. No pushback, nothing.
None. Nothing.
And it goes back to the same idea as Russiagate. If you push back, then you're Putinist. I mean, see this argument in the media. Well, You can't criticize Ukraine for fighting back. Well, why were they allowed to defend themselves? Why can't they defend themselves? So even now, attacking Russia's nuclear forces is beyond criticism. Even this makes you some kind of a Putinist or you know, carrying water for Putin. It's just the insanity is really, yeah. We it just seems like we can't wait to get into a nuclear war here, and
Yeah.
I think that this is such a huge step towards that direction. It's kind of terrifying. But when you open the newspapers or listen to the politicians, there's, the mood is of celebration almost. It's a very irresponsible generation ruling us at the moment. And I can't help but to think that the Russiagate had something to do with this.
Absolutely. It criminalized diplomacy with Russia. And this is something that Stephen F. Cohen repeatedly warned about, that this whole fake scandal of accusing Trump of being a Russian agent and controlled by Russia, it was making diplomacy impossible. And that was going to have disastrous consequences. That's why Stephen F. Cohen called his last book War with Russia ? Came out, I think, in 2019, maybe, yeah, around then. And that's what he feared Russiagate was fueling. And he proved to be exactly right. And, your question about, is it plausible that NATO didn't know about this operation? It's especially salient in light of that recent New York Times article bragging about how the U.S. was running the Ukraine war and helping it to plan all these operations against Russia. So they want us to think that this is one operation that somehow evaded U.S. and Western intelligence. It's strange credulity. I wouldn't be surprised if the Trump team didn't know about it, because it's no secret the Trump team is not, or at least Trump himself is not super enthusiastic about this proxy war. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was not aware of it and some of his top principles. But especially given that the planning goes back a year and a half when Joe Biden was still in power and Biden's team was salivating at the mouth over this proxy war. They were openly bragging about how it was being used to weaken Russia, with no regard, by the way, for the consequences to Ukraine. I just find it hard to believe that they wouldn't have that they wouldn't have known about it. And yeah, this will undoubtedly trigger a Russian reaction. And I'm worried foremost for what this means for Ukraine. There's been a pattern throughout this war that whenever Russia suffers a blow from Ukraine, they retaliate harder against the people of Ukraine. And it's scary to think where this could go. And it's exactly the climate that Russiagate has fueled by repeatedly inculcating in people this belief that we need to be fighting Russia over there. We need to be having a proxy war against it. And one of the ways that's achieved, by the way, is very much how Russiagate worked, is that the public is not told countervailing information. So the information undermining Russiagate was always there. There's only a few of us willing to pay attention to it and document it. Same thing with the guiding narrative in Ukraine, that we, as you put it, the narrative is, like, why can't Ukraine fight back? They were invaded. Okay, I mean, it's true. Yes, they were invaded and they do have the right to fight back. The question is, are there reasonable diplomatic alternatives? And have we played a war in fueling that war rather than helping to stop it? And the answer is absolutely yes. We undermined the Minsk Accords. NATO officials openly bragged that the Minsk Accords were used to stall for time to help Ukraine build up its army to fight Russia. And of course, most fatefully, I think we undermined the Istanbul peace talks that happened 3 years ago, where there was a deal reached or the outlines of a deal reached between Ukraine and Russia. Alexander Chaly, a top Ukrainian negotiator, said we reached a very real compromise. We know what happened. The US and UK stood in the way of that. And that information, which is so vital to understanding the Ukraine war, is completely omitted in our media system. Even dissenting outlets don't really acknowledge it, even though all that information is out there. How many Ukrainian officials now have admitted on the record that there was a peace deal reached, the outlines of a peace deal reached? There was a very real compromise, as Alexander Chaly said. But how many times has that been noted in Western establishment media? It's close to zero.
Yeah, no, I think this, living in this post-reality world, really detached from reality now, is, you can't ignore Russiagate as a key source of this. So, anyways, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to your book. I'll make sure to buy one of the first copies. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll send you a copy.